The laughter started when the elderly man nearly lost his grip on the leash. His wife reached for his arm while their tiny German Shepherd puppy pressed nervously against their legs. Behind the counter, two store clerks pointed, laughed, and wondered aloud why a couple their age would ever choose a dog that would soon outweigh their strength. The couple said nothing. Then the convenience store doors opened. A Navy SEAL walked in with a full-grown German Shepherd beside him. He heard the laughter. He saw the old man lower his eyes, and before taking another step he noticed something about the frightened puppy that everyone else had missed. Why was the puppy reacting so strongly? Would the elderly couple decide they really were too old to keep her? And why did the Navy SEAL's own German Shepherd suddenly refuse to move? This is a fictional story created for storytelling purposes. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. How old did a person have to become before other people stopped asking what they wanted and began deciding what was best for them instead? The question had been following Eleanor Dawson for months. Though on that mild October morning in Smithfield, Virginia, she had no intention of answering it. The sky was pale and clean after overnight rain, and dark patches of moisture still clung to the brick sidewalks beneath the sycamores. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat of their aging silver Buick, with one hand around a paper cup of coffee and the other resting on the soft black and tan back of a German Shepherd puppy, who had apparently decided that personal space was a suggestion rather than a rule. "Penny," Eleanor said. The puppy looked up. Penny was 12 weeks old, female, black and tan, with oversized paws, a dark muzzle, warm brown eyes, and one ear standing proudly while the other still folded sideways, as if it had not yet decided whether adulthood was worth the trouble. She had been in the Dawson home for only 3 weeks and had already destroyed one kitchen sponge, half a gardening glove, and the corner of a church bulletin. "Down." Penny blinked, then she calmly put one paw on Eleanor's thigh. From behind the steering wheel, Raymond Dawson said, "Strong start." Eleanor turned toward her husband. "She understands me. She understands that you're weak." Raymond was 76, still tall despite the slight bend that had entered his shoulders over the years. Decades of repairing tractors, generators, and farm equipment across Isle of Wight County had once given him a broad chest and powerful forearms. Age had narrowed him, but it had not made him fragile. His face was long and weathered, deeply lined around the mouth and eyes, with a slightly crooked nose from a baseball accident in his teens. His white hair was cut short above his ears because he insisted anything longer made him look like a retired magician nobody had hired. His hands were the first thing most people noticed, large, scarred, rough around the knuckles. Eleanor had trusted those hands for 51 years. They had repaired washing machines, built shelves, lifted children from cribs, carried groceries through rain, buried an old family dog, and once repaired a torn Halloween costume with fishing line because Raymond had refused to admit that sewing might be outside his professional qualifications. Recently, however, he had begun keeping his right hand closer to his body. Eleanor had noticed. She had not yet asked. Eleanor herself was 73, 5 feet 3 inches tall, slim without looking delicate, with pale skin that still freckled in summer and silver hair cut just below her ears. Her blue-gray eyes usually looked gentle, but they sharpened quickly whenever someone spoke to her as though age had reduced her intelligence. She had spent 34 years working in an elementary school office, remembering which children had allergies, which parents were divorced, who needed lunch money, and which crying child simply needed 5 quiet minutes before returning to class. Patience had become her reputation. At home, however, patience sometimes came with a price. Eleanor had a habit of swallowing irritation until it became resentment. 3 weeks earlier, she and Raymond had adopted Penny. Their son had reacted as if they had announced plans to climb Mount Everest in house slippers. "A German Shepherd? At your age?" Eleanor had hated those final 3 words more than the question itself. The decision had not been foolish. They had researched veterinary costs, training, fencing, exercise requirements, insurance, and the size Penny would eventually reach. Raymond had even reinforced a section of the backyard fence before they brought her home. But their son had still explained the risks slowly, very slowly, as though speaking louder and slower could somehow turn his parents into younger people. That morning, Eleanor and Raymond were taking Penny to her first appointment with a new veterinarian when Raymond pulled into Harbor Junction Market, a convenience store near the highway where locals bought gasoline, coffee, newspapers, and fried chicken that Eleanor believed was suspiciously good for a place that also sold windshield fluid. "We need milk," Raymond said. "We have milk. We have something that used to dream of becoming milk." Eleanor sighed. "Fine." Penny needed practice walking in public anyway. Inside Harbor Junction, the air smelled of coffee, floor cleaner, hot biscuits, and rubber from a rack of new windshield wipers. Fluorescent lights brightened the wide aisles. Raymond held Penny's handmade brown leather leash in his right hand. He had cut and stitched it himself from leather left over from an old tool belt. Penny walked perfectly beside him for approximately 7 seconds. Then she discovered beef jerky. "Absolutely not," Eleanor said. Penny disagreed. Near the counter stood 2 young female employees wearing green store polos. One was a round-faced brunette in her early 20s who was restocking paper cups. The other was Tessa Morgan. Tessa was 25, tall and narrow-shouldered with auburn hair tied into a loose ponytail, pale green eyes, and an expressive face that often revealed her thoughts before good judgment had time to catch up. She had worked at Harbor Junction for nearly 2 years and had developed the habit of turning slow shifts into entertainment. Customers generally liked her quick humor when that humor was not aimed at them. She noticed Penny first. "Oh my gosh," Tessa said. "Look at those feet." Eleanor smiled despite herself. Penny wagged her tail. Then somewhere behind the counter a metal stock bin slipped from someone's hands. It crashed onto the tile. Penny exploded backward. Her paws scrambled against the smooth floor. Her small body twisted and the leather leash snapped tight. Raymond's right hand failed him. Not completely, only for a second. But sometimes 1 second was enough. His fingers loosened without permission. He caught the leash again, but the sudden pull dragged him sideways. His hip struck a cardboard snack display, and bags of chips spilled across the aisle. "Raymond!" Eleanor grabbed his arm. Penny crouched near his boots, trembling. For one heartbeat, the store went quiet. Then the brunette employee laughed. It might have been nervous laughter. It might have ended there. Tessa laughed too. "That dog's going to drag him through the parking lot when she gets bigger." The other employee covered her mouth. Raymond straightened. His face hardened. Eleanor knew that expression. It appeared when pain became embarrassment, and embarrassment became anger he did not trust himself to speak aloud. Tessa looked from Penny to Raymond, then toward Eleanor. "You two sure you want a German Shepherd?" she asked with a grin. "I mean, if you can barely stay upright now." The second employee laughed again. Something cold moved through Eleanor's stomach. She did not care about the fallen chips. She did not care about strangers looking. What hurt was how quickly Raymond had stopped being a man in their eyes and had become a joke about being old. Tessa pulled out her phone. "Wait, hold on." Eleanor's expression changed. "Please don't." But Tessa had already lifted the camera. Raymond bent toward the leash. Penny pressed herself tightly against his shin. Tessa spoke half toward the phone and half toward her coworker. "They can't even hold themselves up, and they've got a German Shepherd?" The automatic doors opened. A man entered, with a large German Shepherd walking closely beside his left leg. Andrew Hayes was 40 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, broad-shouldered and lean, with short dark brown hair clipped close at the sides, a strong, angular face, and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore a plain dark jacket over civilian clothes, yet there was a controlled precision in the way he moved. Andrew was an active-duty Navy SEAL temporarily assigned to training work in Virginia. Years of service had taught him to read rooms quickly, identify problems, and act before hesitation could become danger. That instinct had saved lives. It had also given him the unfortunate habit of solving problems before asking whether anyone wanted his solution. Beside him walked Boone, a 7-year-old male German shepherd with a rich black saddle, deep tan legs, a dark muzzle, upright ears, and the measured posture of a dog that had spent years learning exactly where to place every foot. Boone was larger than Penny by several worlds. Andrew heard Tessa's sentence before the doors had fully closed. His eyes moved to the phone, then Raymond, then Eleanor. He stepped directly between Tessa's camera and the elderly couple. "Put it down!" Tessa's smile disappeared. "What?" "The phone." Andrew did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "I was just—" "Put it down!" Tessa lowered it. Eleanor felt relief for perhaps half a second, then Andrew turned toward Raymond. "You okay, sir?" "I'm fine." Raymond bent to gather the fallen snack bags. Andrew immediately reached for his elbow. Raymond jerked his arm away. "I said I'm fine." Andrew stopped. Their eyes met. Neither man looked particularly pleased. Andrew had stepped in because he hated watching someone be humiliated, yet within seconds he had made an assumption of his own. Old man, lost balance, needs help. Raymond saw the realization cross Andrew's face. So did Eleanor. Then Boone stopped moving. A register behind them beeped. Once. Then again. A cashier scanned another item. Beep. Boone's entire body stiffened. Andrew looked down. "Heel." Boone did not move. Andrew repeated the command firmer. "Boone, heel." Nothing. The large German shepherd stared toward the register, ears angled slightly backward. Andrew's jaw tightened. Eleanor watched him carefully. Interesting, she thought. Apparently everyone in this room had something they did not want other people to notice. By late afternoon, Eleanor was standing at the kitchen counter when her phone began vibrating. One message, then another, then several more. Raymond sat at the table while Penny slept beneath his chair. Eleanor opened a notification. Someone had posted Tessa's video in the Smithfield Community Facebook group. The clip began with Raymond stumbling. It showed Penny twisting against the leash. It showed Eleanor bending toward him. It did not show the metal bin falling. It did not show Andrew ordering Tessa to stop. The caption read, "Elderly couple tries handling German Shepherd puppy at Harbor Junction." Comments were already accumulating. "Poor dog, that puppy will be huge. Some people don't know when to admit they're too old." Eleanor stopped reading. Their son called before she could put the phone down. Raymond answered. "Hey." He listened. Eleanor could hear their son's voice, but not every word. Raymond's shoulders slowly lowered. "No," he said. "Nobody got hurt." A pause. "Yes, I know how big she'll get." Another pause. Eleanor watched his right hand lying flat on the table. Their son spoke longer this time. Raymond's did not interrupt. Finally, he said, "You think we should return her?" Penny woke at the sound of his voice and gently rested her chin across his shoe. Raymond looked down. Their son said something else. Raymond remained silent for so long that Eleanor stepped closer. Then he answered, "Maybe you're right." Eleanor stopped in the doorway. Raymond did not know she had hurt him. Penny closed her eyes again, still resting against his foot. And Eleanor suddenly understood that the laughter inside Harbor Junction had not been the most dangerous thing that happened that day. The dangerous thing was how easily other people's judgment could begin sounding like your own voice. By the next morning, Smithfield had settled beneath a low, silver sky, the kind of autumn day that never quite decided whether it meant to rain. The gutters were still wet. The oak leaves along the Dawson driveway stuck dark and flat against the pavement, and inside the house the silence between Eleanor and Raymond had acquired the stubborn weight of a third person at the breakfast table. Raymond poured Eleanor's coffee before he poured his own. He still remembered exactly how she liked it. 1 spoonful of sugar, enough milk to soften the bitterness, but not enough to make it pale. Eleanor placed his morning pills beside his plate. Neither thanked the other. After 51 years of marriage, affection did not disappear just because two people were angry. Sometimes it became more irritating because it remained present in every practiced little kindness. Penny sat between them, watching a piece of toast with such concentration that Eleanor almost admired her discipline. Raymond broke off a corner. No, Eleanor said. I wasn't giving it to her. You were negotiating with her. Raymond ate the toast himself. Penny looked betrayed. That should have made Eleanor laugh. It did not. Raymond finally said, We should call the rescue. Eleanor looked up. No. We need to at least talk to them. About what? You know what? No, Raymond. I know what everybody else thinks. I'm asking what you think. His jaw tightened. I think she's going to be 60 pounds before we know it. We knew that 3 weeks ago. My hand slipped. That metal bin scared her. My hand slipped, Eleanor. There it was. Not the Facebook video, not Tessa, not their son. The thing Raymond could not joke away. Eleanor folded her napkin carefully. So we change how we handle her. And if changing isn't enough, then we decide that when we actually know something. Raymond gave a short, humorless laugh. Or we keep her because you don't want some 25-year-old girl to think she was right. Eleanor stared at him. The remark landed because there was truth inside it. She had spent most of the night furious at strangers, furious at the comments, furious at their son for speaking as if two people who had survived mortgages, layoffs, surgeries, funerals, children, grandchildren, recessions, and 51 Virginia summers had suddenly become incapable of understanding the concept of a large dog. But Raymond was right about one thing. Pride could disguise itself as principle. And returning her because you're embarrassed would be different? Eleanor asked. Raymond looked toward the window. The rain had started, light enough to be almost invisible except where it darkened the porch rail. They did not raise their voices. That was the Dawson way. Their worst arguments had always been quiet. Raymond stood, carried his plate to the sink, and rinsed it. Eleanor watched the fingers of his right hand curl awkwardly around the edge of the ceramic. He noticed her watching. What? Nothing. He dried the plate too quickly. Don't do that. Do what? Look at me like I'm evidence. Eleanor felt something sharp rise in her chest. I'm your wife. That doesn't mean I need inspecting. Penny chose that moment to steal the napkin from Raymond's chair. For 3 absurd seconds, husband and wife watched the puppy trot proudly across the kitchen, with white paper hanging from her mouth like a flag of surrender nobody had agreed to. Raymond almost smiled. Almost. Later that morning, he went into the hallway to repair a loose cabinet hinge beneath the linen shelves. It was an unnecessary repair. The hinge had squeaked for 6 years and had never bothered him before. But Raymond belonged to a generation of men who often preferred screws, wood, and machinery to conversations they could not control. Eleanor was folding towels nearby when she heard the first metallic tap. A screwdriver hit the floor. Raymond picked it up. 30 seconds later, it fell again. He muttered something under his breath. On the 3rd drop, Eleanor stopped folding. Raymond? I've got it. You've dropped it 3 times. I'm aware. He reached down. His right thumb and first 2 fingers closed slowly around the handle. Too slowly. Eleanor felt her anger change shape. How long? Raymond froze. How long has your hand been doing that? He sat back on his heels. It's nothing. How long? Off and on. Raymond? He exhaled through his nose and leaned against the cabinet. Almost a year. Eleanor stared at him. A year. There were betrayals louder than that, certainly. Affairs, lies about money, secrets involving entire second lives. And then there were smaller secrets that quietly rearranged the furniture of a marriage. A year, she repeated. It wasn't this bad at first. What happened? Raymond looked down at his hand. Remember the case tractor gearbox that dropped on me back when I worked at Hollis Equipment? Eleanor did remember. 23 years earlier, Raymond had come home with his wrist swollen purple and 2 fingers stitched where metal had split the skin. The nerve never healed right, he continued. Doctor said it might get worse as I got older. Past year, the first 3 fingers go numb sometimes. Usually comes back in a minute. And you didn't tell me. I didn't want this. This what? He looked at her then. That face. Eleanor felt as though he had slapped the table between them. What face? The one everyone makes now. The pharmacist, David when I climb a ladder, that nurse last winter when I said I could walk to the parking lot myself. His voice remained calm, but a lifetime of irritation had begun slipping through. Once people see one thing going wrong, they start looking for the rest. Suddenly, you're not Raymond with a bad hand. You're 76. Every decision becomes suspicious. Eleanor's anger did not disappear, but she understood it. That was inconvenient. You thought I'd do that to you? I thought you might start, without meaning to. The answer hurt more than she expected. You didn't even give me the chance not to. Raymond said nothing. Across town, Andrew Hayes walked through the automatic doors of Harbor Junction Market, without Boone beside him. He had left the German Shepherd in the SUV with the windows partially lowered, more because he wanted the conversation quick than because he expected trouble. Tessa Morgan was behind the counter. Her phone was nowhere in sight. The woman standing beside the register was Maria Bell, Harbor Junction's manager. Maria was 52, compact and broad through the shoulders, with cropped salt and pepper hair, brown skin, dark eyes, and the level expression of someone who had spent 28 years solving arguments between customers, delivery drivers, employees, and vending machine representatives. She wore no jewelry except a plain wedding band and had the unhurried manner of a person who disliked drama but was not frightened by it. I assume this is about yesterday? Maria said. Yes. Tessa crossed her arms. Andrew looked at her. Take the video down. I already did. From where? My page? It's still circulating. I can't delete what other people shared. Andrew's voice hardened. Then post that the clip was taken out of context. Tessa flushed. It wasn't fake. No, it was worse. It was selective. Maria stepped in before Tessa could answer. She'll post a correction. Andrew looked at Maria. And? And what? You're keeping her? Tessa stared at him. Maria's expression barely changed. I disciplined my employee. That part is between me and her. She filmed customers to humiliate them. Yes. She should be fired. Maria studied him for a moment. You military? Andrew did not answer immediately. Why? Because you sound like a man used to consequences being clean. His face tightened. Maria continued. Fire her, and she learns that getting caught costs a paycheck. Make her correct it, apologize, and stand behind this same counter facing every person who saw what she did. Maybe she learns what shame feels like without turning it into another public spectacle. Tessa looked miserable. Andrew was surprised to discover that did not satisfy him as much as he had expected. Tessa muttered, I just thought it was funny. Andrew turned toward her. That's not helping you. I know. No, I don't think you do. Maria looked at Tessa. Post the correction. Tessa reluctantly reached for her phone. Andrew left before his anger persuaded him to say something he would later have to defend. Outside, Boone was sitting upright behind the open rear hatch. Andrew clipped the leash on and led him toward the side entrance of the store, intending to buy bottled water before leaving. They reached the polished concrete just inside the doorway. Boone stopped. Andrew continued one step. The leash tightened. Heel! Boone remained planted. Andrew looked back, irritated. Come on! The German Shepherd lowered his head slightly. Boone? Nothing. Andrew reached automatically for the leash, preparing to apply enough pressure to make hesitation inconvenient. Then he saw Boone's front leg trembling. Very slightly. So slightly that a stranger would have missed it. Andrew did not. He loosened his grip. Boone's ears had gone back. His weight shifted toward the door. Andrew followed his gaze to the glossy floor reflecting the fluorescent lights. For a few seconds, the man who had spent years reading terrain, bodies, threats, and movement understood something embarrassingly simple. Boone was not refusing. Boone was afraid. Andrew backed outside. The dog followed immediately. He stood beside the SUV for a long moment, looking down at his old partner. "How long have you been telling me?" Boone offered no answer. Dogs rarely did. That evening, the Dawson house smelled faintly of tomato soup and toasted bread. Eleanor and Raymond had eaten together, spoken when necessary, and carefully avoided repairing the larger thing that had broken between them. After dinner, Raymond disappeared into the mudroom. When he returned, he carried Penny's brown leather leash. He placed it on the kitchen table. The leather looked beautiful beneath the warm overhead light, thick, neatly stitched, made by a man who had always believed his hands could solve almost anything. Raymond ran his right thumb along the edge. Then he said quietly, "If my hand can't hold her, this isn't about what anybody thinks anymore." Eleanor looked at the leash. Yesterday she might have argued. Tonight she did not. Penny lay beneath the table chewing enthusiastically on a rubber toy, unaware that two human beings were trying to decide what responsibility looked like when love, pride, age, fear, and practical limits all occupied the same room. Eleanor reached across the table. She did not take Raymond's hand. She rested her fingers beside it. Close enough to be there, far enough not to take over. For the first time since the video appeared, neither of them asked whether keeping Penny would prove somebody wrong. The harder question was finally beginning to take its place. What would be fair to Penny? And what would be fair to them? 3 days later, a cool October wind moved across Suffolk, Virginia, carrying the smell of damp pine and wet earth after a night of light rain. Eleanor and Raymond drove east with Penny in the back seat, neither of them speaking much about what the morning might decide. The silence was different from the one that had filled their kitchen after the video. This one was not angry. It was cautious, as if both of them were afraid that saying the wrong thing might turn an evaluation into a verdict. Eleanor had made the appointment at Tidewater Canine Behavior Center after spending nearly 2 hours reading reviews, credentials, and articles she barely understood. Raymond had watched from across the room. "You know, you're researching that woman harder than we researched our mortgage," he had said. "Our mortgage never bit the furniture." "Neither has Penny." Eleanor had looked toward the hallway. A piece of baseboard was missing. Raymond had reconsidered. "Fair." They had agreed on only one thing before leaving the house. They would not return Penny, because strangers had embarrassed them, but they would not keep her simply because returning her might feel like admitting those strangers had been right. Penny deserved a better reason than pride. So did they. Tidewater Canine Behavior Center occupied a low brick building set behind a veterinary clinic on the edge of Suffolk. There were no cheerful cartoon dogs painted on the windows, no bright signs promising obedience in 10 days. The waiting room was deliberately quiet, with rubber flooring, wide spacing between chairs, and privacy panels separating nervous animals. Penny noticed everything. Her nose worked furiously. A Labrador behind one divider sneezed. Penny froze. A metal bowl clattered somewhere in the back. Her body dropped instantly, not dramatically, just low. Her ears flattened, and she tucked herself against Raymond's shin. He looked down. Eleanor saw his right hand tighten around the leather leash. Before he could say anything, a woman stepped into the room. Grace Holloway was 58, medium height, broad through the hips, with thick gray blonde hair pulled into a practical braid, and a sun-browned face lined deeply around the eyes. She wore dark work pants, walking shoes, and a navy polo with no decorative paw prints. Her voice was low and unhurried. Grace had spent 26 years working with fearful and reactive dogs, first in shelters, and later as a certified canine behavior consultant. Years earlier, she had been bitten badly by a terrified shepherd no one had recognized as terrified until it was too late. The scars remained pale along her left forearm, and the experience had made her suspicious of labels such as stubborn, dominant, or bad, when fear might be the simpler explanation. Grace did not reach for Penny. That was the first thing Raymond noticed. She stopped several feet away. "Would you like me to come closer?" she asked. "Or would you rather let her look at me first?" Raymond glanced at Eleanor. Nobody had asked them that about Penny before. "Let her look," he said. Grace nodded. Penny stared at her. Grace turned slightly sideways instead of facing the puppy directly. 30 seconds passed. Then Penny sniffed. Another 30. Finally, Penny stepped forward. Grace dropped a small piece of chicken onto the floor without extending her hand. Penny ate it. "Well," Grace said, "she has excellent judgment where chicken is concerned." Raymond's mouth twitched. The evaluation took almost an hour. Grace watched Penny respond to doors opening, footsteps, rolling carts, unfamiliar people, textured flooring, and several controlled sounds played at very low volume. Nothing was forced. When Penny became tense, Grace stopped. Raymond found that harder to accept than he expected. At one point, Penny startled when Grace lightly tapped a metal tray from across the room. "She needs to hear it again," Raymond said. "Not yet. She has to get used to it." "She does." Grace looked at him. "But getting used to something and being overwhelmed by it are not the same process." Raymond folded his arms. Grace did not argue. She waited until Penny's breathing slowed, then she repeated the sound more softly. This time Penny looked toward the tray but did not crouch. Grace rewarded her. Eleanor watched her husband watching the dog. Raymond had repaired machinery for most of his life. If an engine knocked, he investigated the knock. If a belt slipped, he tightened the belt. If a part failed, he replaced it. Dogs were less cooperative with that philosophy. "So what's wrong with her?" he finally asked. Grace tilted her head. "I haven't seen anything wrong with her." Raymond frowned. "She panicked in a store. She's 12 weeks old. A metal bin crashed behind her in an unfamiliar building." Grace crouched several feet from Penny. "She's sensitive to sudden metallic noise. Crowded indoor spaces also raise her stress faster than average, but she recovers. She checks back in with you. She's curious when she feels safe. Those are useful things." Eleanor asked the question she had been avoiding. "Is she too much dog for us?" Grace looked from Eleanor to Raymond. "I don't decide that based on birthdays." Raymond's eyes shifted toward her. "I decide it based on management, physical ability, environment, willingness to train, and whether the arrangement is fair to the dog and the people." That answer seemed to satisfy neither of them completely, which Eleanor suspected meant it was probably a good answer. Grace asked Raymond to walk Penny across the training room. She noticed immediately how he held the leash. "You're compensating with your shoulder." "My hand gets numb." "Which fingers?" Raymond told her. Grace studied the homemade leather leash. "You made this?" "Yes. It's good leather work." Raymond straightened slightly. Then Grace ruined the compliment. "I wouldn't use it like this." He frowned. She brought out a padded hands-free leash system designed to secure around the waist and hips while still allowing a secondary hand grip. Raymond stared at it as though she had placed an adult diaper on the table. "No." Eleanor looked away before he saw her smile. Grace remained expressionless. "It distributes force through your center instead of relying on finger strength." "I can hold a leash." "Yesterday you told me sometimes you can't feel 3 fingers." Raymond's jaw hardened. "I'm not walking around town strapped to my dog." "You're already attached to your dog." "That's different." Grace looked toward Eleanor. Eleanor had known Raymond long enough to recognize the exact point where logic ceased being relevant. She waited until they were alone in the hallway afterward. Then she held up the padded belt. "What exactly bothers you about it?" "It looks ridiculous." "It looks like a leash." "It looks like something made for a man who can't hold a leash." There it was. Eleanor studied him. "Are you afraid other people will see the belt?" she asked quietly. "Or are you afraid you'll have to see it?" Raymond's face changed. He did not answer. Across the building, Andrew Hayes was discovering that he disliked questions almost as much as Raymond did. Andrew had brought Boone in that morning after the incident at Harbor Junction. He had told himself he wanted an objective assessment. What he actually wanted was a set of exercises that would restore the dog he remembered. Dr. Samuel Mercer examined Boone in a quiet room away from the main clinic. Samuel was 53, tall but slightly stooped, with a narrow face, warm brown skin, thinning black hair threaded heavily with gray, and rectangular glasses that constantly slid down his nose. He had worked as a veterinarian for nearly 3 decades and had developed the unnerving habit of allowing long silences after difficult questions. Early in his career, he had pushed an aging police dog through rehabilitation because the handler desperately wanted 1 more year of service. The dog recovered physically, but never regained its old confidence. Samuel had never forgotten the difference between making an animal capable of continuing and asking whether it should. He flexed Boone's hips carefully. Boone tolerated it. Then Samuel extended the right rear leg. Boone turned his head. Not a growl, not even a whine. Just a look. Samuel stopped. "Early joint pain," he said. "Likely mild osteoarthritis beginning in the hips, nothing catastrophic." Andrew exhaled. "So we treat it?" "Yes." "And the avoidance?" "Pain may contribute, age may contribute, stress history may contribute." Andrew frowned. "That's vague." "Living creatures usually are." Samuel watched Boone walk across a rubber mat, then toward a smooth section of flooring. Boone slowed. Andrew clicked his tongue. "Come on." Samuel raised a hand. "Let him decide." Boone stopped at the edge. Andrew's shoulders tightened. "He used to walk over anything." "I believe you." "So how do we get him back there?" Samuel looked at him over the top of his glasses. "Back where?" "Normal." Samuel was silent long enough to irritate Andrew. Then he asked, "Normal for you or normal for Boone?" Andrew's expression cooled. "He's trained." "That wasn't my question." "He's worked in environments worse than a clinic floor." "That wasn't my question either." Andrew looked toward Boone. The shepherd stood quietly, his muzzle beginning to gray around the chin. For years, Andrew had treated Boone's reliability almost like a natural law. Boone moved when asked. Boone entered when asked. Boone endured noise, crowds, vehicles, strange flooring, long waits, sudden changes. Andrew had interpreted all of it as strength. He had rarely considered that strength could have an accumulated cost. "He can still do the work," Andrew said. Samuel nodded. "Probably." The answer surprised him. Then Samuel added, "The harder question is whether everything he can still do is something he should still be asked to do." Andrew disliked him immediately, which, somewhere beneath his irritation, he recognized as another sign that the man might be worth listening to. By the time Eleanor and Raymond left the behavior center, the clouds had thinned and pale sunlight spread across the damp parking lot. Raymond carried Penny's original brown leather leash in one hand. The padded hands-free system remained folded beneath Eleanor's arm. They were halfway to their Buick when Raymond noticed Andrew near the far edge of the lot. Boone stood in front of a broad metal drainage plate embedded in the pavement. Andrew gave a quiet command. "Heel." Boone did not cross. Raymond stopped walking. Andrew waited. A few months earlier, or perhaps even a few days earlier, Raymond suspected the man would have repeated the command. Instead, Andrew stood still. Boone looked at him. Andrew looked at the metal plate. Then, without another word, he stepped sideways and walked around it. Boone followed. No correction, no struggle, no victory. Just another route. Raymond looked down at Penny's leather leash in his hand. He ran his thumb along the stitching he had made himself. For most of his life, holding on tighter had meant responsibility. A wrench, a steering wheel, a ladder, a child's bicycle seat, a leash. But standing in that parking lot, watching a Navy SEAL choose not to pull a trained German shepherd across 3 feet of metal, Raymond felt an uncomfortable thought take shape. Perhaps stopping was not always surrender. Perhaps changing the way you held something did not mean you loved it less. And perhaps a person did not become weaker simply because he stopped pulling. Sometimes, Raymond thought, stopping the pull was the first moment you understood what was actually on the other end of the line. The following Monday brought a clear October morning to Smithfield, Virginia. Cool enough for Eleanor to open the kitchen window while she made coffee, but not cold enough to turn on the heat. The yard beyond the glass was scattered with yellow leaves, and Penny was outside attacking one of them with the grave concentration of a creature who believed autumn had personally challenged her authority. 4 days had passed since the visit to Tidewater Canine Behavior Center. The padded, hands-free leash Grace Holloway had recommended still sat untouched on the mudroom bench. Raymond walked past it every morning without looking directly at it, which Eleanor considered impressive given that ignoring an object so deliberately required far more attention than simply admitting it existed. She had resisted mentioning it. After 51 years of marriage, she knew the difference between allowing someone time and giving him enough rope to hang an argument from. Raymond came into the kitchen carrying Penny's old brown leather leash. He set it beside his coffee. 30 days, Eleanor said. Raymond looked at her. 30 days of what? Of not being stupid. That seems ambitious. She almost smiled. 30 days before we make any decision about Penny. We don't return her because someone laughed at us. We don't keep her because we're angry that someone laughed at us. For 30 days, we do this properly. We follow Grace's recommendations. We figure out what your hand can safely manage. We watch Penny instead of trying to prove anything, and then we decide. Raymond took a slow drink of coffee. And if the answer is that she needs another home? Eleanor looked through the window at Penny, who had now discovered that the leaf could be killed more efficiently by sitting on it. Then we find her the right one. It hurt to say. That was exactly why she knew she meant it. Raymond studied her face for several seconds. And if the answer is she stays? Then she stays because it works, not because our son thinks it won't. Raymond nodded once. 30 days. The rules changed immediately. They shortened Penny's morning walks, but added a second one in the afternoon. They stopped taking her into crowded places simply because exposure was supposed to be good for her. Instead, Eleanor sat with Penny on a bench 50 yards from a busy grocery entrance, feeding tiny pieces of chicken whenever a shopping cart rattled past, without sending the puppy into a crouch. Raymond began carrying a small notebook in his shirt pocket, though he insisted it was not a dog diary. Eleanor discovered entries such as truck brakes, looked, recovered in 6 seconds, and trash can lid, bad but no pulling. That is absolutely a dog diary, she told him. It's data. Of course, entirely masculine scientific data. Penny complicated their experiment by being spectacularly inconsistent. One morning she calmly ignored a lawnmower, and 10 minutes later became offended by a plastic grocery bag moving in the breeze. She learned wait at the front door, then apparently forgot the entire English language when a squirrel appeared near the bird feeder. She slept for 2 hours with her head on Raymond's shoe and woke up determined to dismantle the laundry basket. Eleanor began to understand something she had intellectually known but emotionally resisted. Success with Penny would not look like Penny becoming convenient. It would look like the three of them becoming more observant. Raymond took longer to accept the other half of the arrangement. On the 6th day, Eleanor found him in the garage with the old leather leash clamped to his workbench. His reading glasses sat low on his nose. A leather punch, measuring tape, rivets, and an old belt lay beside him. He had removed the wrist loop and was measuring a new section. "What are you doing?" Eleanor asked. "Ruining a perfectly good leash." Finally. He glanced up. "Grace's thing has too much nylon. Feels like tying myself to a lawn chair." He had decided to build his own waist system. The original leather would remain as the lead, but a wider section would pass around his hips with a quick-release connection and a secondary grip for his left hand. He worked slowly, partly because of the precision and partly because the first 3 fingers of his right hand went numb twice before lunch. Eleanor saw it happen. This time Raymond did not hide his hand beneath the bench. He stopped, shook it gently, waited for sensation to return, and continued. It was a small act, but Eleanor recognized the courage inside it. For years, Raymond had believed accepting a limitation made the limitation larger. Now he was building around one. When he finished, he stood in the driveway with the leather belt fastened around his waist while Penny stared at him. "I look ridiculous," he said. Eleanor considered him carefully. "You looked worse in 1978, when you grew sideburns. Those were fashionable. Those were crimes." Raymond laughed despite himself. Then they walked. The first test came before they reached the end of the block. A delivery truck rounded the corner too quickly and released its air brakes with a hard mechanical hiss. Penny startled and lunged sideways. The leather lead snapped tight. Raymond's right hand opened reflexively, exactly as it had inside Harbor Junction. But this time the force went across his hips instead of through his fingers. He took one uneven step and remained standing. Penny looked back at him, breathing quickly. Raymond did not jerk her closer. He waited. Eleanor waited too. A few seconds later, Penny's body softened. They continued. Eleanor wanted desperately to say, "See, it worked." She wanted to praise Raymond, reassure him, turn the moment into proof that everything would be fine. Instead, she said, "We need eggs." Raymond glanced sideways at her. "That's all you've got? Would you prefer a parade?" "A small one. Budget cuts." His smile remained for the next half block. Later, Eleanor realized that pretending the moment was ordinary had been its own kind of respect. Raymond did not want applause for adapting to age. He wanted permission to adapt without becoming a spectacle. On the 12th afternoon of their 30-day agreement, a blue compact car stopped at the curb outside the Dawson house. Eleanor was pruning dead stems from a pot of chrysanthemums on the porch, while Penny slept beneath the swing. Tessa Morgan climbed out. She was not wearing the green Harbor Junction polo this time. Instead, she wore jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. Without the counter, the phone, and another employee beside her, she looked younger than 25. More uncertain, too. Penny raised her head. Eleanor did not invite Tessa closer until the puppy settled. "Mrs. Dawson?" Tessa asked. "Yes. I wanted to apologize." Eleanor put down the pruning shears. Tessa swallowed. "I didn't think the video would get shared like that." There were many bad ways to begin an apology. Eleanor decided this ranked remarkably high. "Would it have been all right if only 6 people saw it?" Tessa's face reddened. "No, that's not what I meant." "It's what you said." Tessa looked at the porch boards. "I'm not good at this." "You were quite good at filming us." The words came sharper than Eleanor intended. Tessa flinched. For a brief second, Eleanor felt satisfaction. Then she disliked the satisfaction more than she disliked the girl. Tessa sat on the bottom porch step only after Eleanor gestured that she could. She kept her hands together between her knees. "My dad had a stroke in May," she said after a long silence. "He's 68. Eleanor said nothing. Tessa continued. "Before that, he did everything himself. He repaired roofs, drove everywhere, wouldn't let anybody carry groceries for him. Now I have to remind him which pills he took. Sometimes I button his shirt because his left hand doesn't work right. Last month he yelled at me because I cut his meat without asking." She gave a small, embarrassed laugh that vanished quickly. "I thought he was being impossible. Then I saw Mr. Dawson in the store and—" She stopped. "And you laughed," Eleanor said. "Yeah." "Why?" Tessa wiped her palms against her jeans. "I don't know, maybe because it scared me? Seeing somebody older lose control of something for a second. I think I've been making jokes about old people because I'm terrified of watching my dad become one." Eleanor studied her. She could understand that fear. Understanding it did not make what happened less ugly. "Knowing why you were cruel doesn't make the cruelty disappear," Eleanor said. Tessa nodded. "I know. Do you?" "I'm trying to." That answer was better than an excuse. Not good enough for forgiveness, perhaps, but better. A metallic clink came from the garage. Raymond was working at the bench with Penny's modified leash spread before him, replacing one rivet that had begun to pull crooked. Tessa looked through the open garage door. "Is that the leash from the store?" "Parts of it," Eleanor said. Raymond stepped outside when he heard voices. His expression cooled immediately when he recognized Tessa. She stood. "Mr. Dawson, I'm sorry." Raymond looked at her for several uncomfortable seconds. "Okay." It was not forgiveness, it was acknowledgement. Tessa accepted it. She glanced at the leather belt attached to the leash. "So you're keeping Penny?" Raymond looked toward the puppy, who had rolled onto her back beneath the porch swing and was sleeping with all 4 feet in the air. Then he looked at the modified leash in his hand. "I don't know yet." Tessa appeared surprised. "Oh." Raymond rubbed his thumb over the new stitching. "I'm seeing whether we can learn how to live together." Tessa left a few minutes later. Eleanor watched the small blue car disappear around the corner. Raymond returned to the garage without another word. Penny followed him, carrying a yellow leaf in her mouth like a trophy. Eleanor remained on the porch. Something in Raymond's answer stayed with her. 3 weeks earlier, Penny had represented movement, youth, noise, responsibility, perhaps even defiance. After the store, she had become something worse. A test of whether Raymond was still strong enough, whether Eleanor was still independent enough, whether their son or Tessa or the strangers online had been right about people their age. But somewhere between the behavior center, the modified leash, and that first successful walk around the block, Raymond had stopped talking about proving anything. He had not said, "I'm keeping her." He had said, "We can learn." Eleanor looked through the garage door at her husband bending over his workbench while Penny sat beside him, chewing the leaf into progressively smaller pieces. For the first time since Harbor Junction, Eleanor felt no urgency to know how the 30 days would end. Perhaps that was progress too. Not every important decision needed to be conquered. Some simply needed enough time for the truth to become louder than pride. Day 17 of the Dawson Agreement arrived beneath a bright, late October sky, the kind of Virginia morning that made caution feel unnecessarily pessimistic. The air over Smithfield was cool, but not cold. Sunlight flashed through red and gold maple leaves, and a clean breeze carried the smells of dry grass, kettle corn, wood smoke, and cinnamon from the annual Isle of Wight Harvest Market. Eleanor had chosen the event carefully. It was outdoors. The booths were spread across a broad field rather than squeezed inside a building. There would be no echoing walls, no polished tile, and plenty of space to retreat if Penny became uncomfortable. After more than 2 weeks of short walks, distant shopping carts, quietly played metallic sounds, and Raymond's notebook full of observations that he still refused to call a dog diary, the market seemed like a reasonable next step. Reasonable, Eleanor had learned, was a useful word because it did not promise success. Penny jumped down from the Buick wearing her brown leather lead, attached to Raymond's homemade waist belt. At 15 weeks now, the German Shepherd puppy had grown noticeably taller. Her paws were still comically large, her black saddle had darkened, and the ear that had once folded sideways now stood upright for several minutes at a time before apparently becoming tired of the responsibility. Raymond fastened the secondary grip around his left hand. "Remember," Eleanor said, "we leave if she needs to leave." Raymond adjusted the belt. "I heard grace the first 6 times. 7. "Thank you for the correction." Penny sneezed into a pile of leaves and tried to bite one. For the first half hour, everything went almost suspiciously well. They stayed along the outer edge of the market. Penny watched children pass with pumpkins. She sniffed beneath a table selling homemade soap. A woman pushing a stroller asked if she could pet her, and Raymond surprised Eleanor by saying, "Not today, but thank you for asking." 2 weeks earlier, he might have accepted simply to prove that Penny could behave. Now he seemed almost relieved to discover that no could be part of responsible handling. Penny noticed a wagon with squeaky wheels and glanced toward Raymond instead of lunging away. Raymond dropped a small treat beside his shoe. "Good recovery," he murmured. Eleanor heard him and smiled. "Data?" "Absolutely." At another booth, Penny sat while Eleanor bought apple butter from a heavy-set older vendor with curly white hair and flowers still dusting the front of her apron. The vendor admired Penny from behind the table but did not reach over it. "She's got growing left to do," she said. That's what everybody keeps reminding us, Raymond replied. There was no defensiveness in his voice. Eleanor noticed that too. Perhaps progress was often visible not in what people did, but in what they no longer felt compelled to down. They might have gone home believing the morning had been a quiet success if a teenage vendor 2 rows over had not lost his grip on a stainless steel serving tray. It hit the support bar of a folding table before striking the ground. The first impact rang like a bell. The second produced a flat metallic crash that cut through conversation across the entire row. Penny reacted before either Dawson could. She dropped low, spun once, then bolted toward the nearest cover. The leash snapped tight around Raymond's waist as Penny disappeared beneath a long folding table covered in plaid cloth. Jars on the tabletop rattled. Raymond caught himself without falling, exactly as the modified belt was designed to help him do, but the physical success did nothing to stop the older humiliation from arriving. He heard Harbor Junction again. Tessa laughing. The employee beside her laughing. He saw his own body on a phone screen, crooked and off balance. He remembered strangers writing that some people did not know when they were too old. A few heads turned. That was all. But to Raymond it felt like the entire field had gone silent. "Penny," he said sharply. "Come." The puppy pressed herself flatter beneath the table. "Penny, come!" Raymond pulled the leash. Penny scrambled backward until her hindquarters touched a cardboard box. "Raymond," Eleanor said, "she can't stay under there. Give her a minute." Another person stopped nearby. Raymond saw the movement from the corner of his eye. He pulled again. Penny's nails dug into the grass. "Come on, girl." Her ears flattened completely. Her eyes were wide enough that Eleanor could see the whites around them. "Raymond?" "I've got her." "No, you've got the leash." His head snapped toward his wife. Eleanor had not meant the sentence to sound so sharp. But once spoken, it could not be softened without making it less true. Raymond looked around. 3 people were watching now. A little boy holding a caramel apple, an elderly man near a produce booth, a woman with a canvas shopping bag. "They're looking," Raymond muttered. Eleanor put her hand over his left wrist. "Stop. I'm not going to let a puppy decide she lives under a table. Stop pulling. Eleanor, they're looking, I know." Raymond's face tightened. Eleanor held his gaze. "So let them look." The words landed differently than any reassurance she could have offered. She did not tell him nobody cared. Somebody probably did. She did not tell him he looked capable. At that moment he did not feel capable. She simply refused to let strangers become part of the decision. Eleanor lowered herself onto the grass beside the table. Her knees complained immediately. Raymond stared at her. "You're going to need help getting up." "Probably." "That's your plan?" "My plan is to be old on purpose." Despite himself, Raymond released a breath that almost became a laugh. Then he sat beside her. They did nothing. That was unexpectedly difficult. Raymond loosened the line until it lay slack across the grass. Eleanor placed her hands in her lap. Neither called Penny. Neither offered chicken. Neither begged, corrected, praised, or negotiated. The market continued around them. Conversations resumed. Someone laughed 2 booths away, and Raymond's shoulders tightened before he realized the laughter had nothing to do with him. A child complained about wanting a larger pumpkin. A dog barked near the entrance. Leaves scraped over the grass. 1 minute passed, then another. Penny's nose appeared beneath the hanging tablecloth. Raymond saw it. He forced himself not to move. The muzzle came next. Penny looked at Eleanor, then Raymond. Raymond's instinct screamed to encourage her. He stayed quiet. Penny crawled forward 1 paw at a time. When she was completely out from beneath the table, she did not stand. Instead, she shuffled across the grass and rested her small, dark muzzle on Raymond's knee. Raymond closed his eyes. Only briefly. His right hand started toward her head, then stopped. Penny was still tense, so he simply let his hand rest beside her. After a few seconds, Penny leaned against his leg on her own. No one applauded. The woman with the shopping bag had already walked away. The boy with the caramel apple was now arguing with his father about whether caramel counted as fruit. The world had not considered Raymond's struggle important enough to stop. Strangely, that realization comforted him. Across the field, Andrew Hayes had witnessed almost all of it. He had arrived 20 minutes earlier with Boone, choosing the open-air market because Dr. Samuel Mercer had recommended quieter, lower-pressure outings. Boone moved well on the grass, though the 7-year-old German Shepherd's pace was slower than Andrew remembered from even a year before. Andrew had begun noticing details he once would have dismissed, how Boone shifted weight away from the right hip after standing too long, how the grey beneath his muzzle seemed brighter in strong sunlight, how he checked unfamiliar surfaces before crossing them. Andrew did not enjoy noticing those things. Attention had always been one of his professional strengths, but attention was easier when it revealed danger he could eliminate. Age offered no target. He was passing a row of woodworking stalls when a portable generator sputtered, coughed, then roared into life. Boone stopped instantly. His ears turned back. Andrew felt tension travel down the leash. "Forward," Andrew nearly said. The command formed automatically in his chest. He looked down at Boone. Then he looked across the field. Raymond Dawson was sitting in the grass beside a folding table. Penny was hidden underneath it. Eleanor sat beside her husband. Raymond was not pulling. Andrew watched him do absolutely nothing. It looked easier than it was. Boone shifted backward. Andrew tightened his hand on the leash. There were people nearby. A trained German Shepherd should be able to walk past a generator. Boone had walked near helicopters, engines, shouting men, slamming doors, and environments far worse than a county harvest market. Andrew knew what the old standard required. He also knew, now, that the old standard belonged partly to him. Boone looked toward another path between the stalls. Andrew stood still for several seconds. Then he turned. "This way." They walked around. It added perhaps 60 yards. No one noticed. No one praised him for making the compassionate choice. There was no recognition that Andrew had just surrendered a piece of an identity built over years, the belief that good discipline meant hesitation should always be overcome. Boone's stride loosened as soon as the generator faded behind them. Andrew felt that change through the leash. It was enough. Eleanor and Raymond left the harvest market not long afterward. Penny climbed into the back seat, circled twice on the blanket, and collapsed with the dramatic exhaustion available only to puppies who had spent most of the morning being carried by their own emotions. The Buick rolled west beneath trees glowing copper in the afternoon light. For several miles, neither Dawson spoke. Raymond occasionally looked in the rearview mirror. Penny was asleep on her side, one paw twitching. Finally, he said, "I thought I was training her." Eleanor turned toward him. "So it turns out?" Raymond glanced down at the brown leather strap crossing his waist before returning his hand to the steering wheel. "Looks like all three of us are learning." Eleanor studied his face. There was no bitterness in it, no defense, no joke about being 76. For the first time since Harbor Junction, Raymond spoke about changing without sounding as though change had defeated him. Eleanor looked through the windshield at the autumn road stretching ahead. She said nothing. Some lessons, she thought, became smaller when someone hurried to explain them. 2 evenings after the harvest market, a steady November rain settled over Smithfield, Virginia, tapping softly against the kitchen windows and turning the backyard into a dark patchwork of wet leaves and silver puddles. Penny had finally fallen asleep beneath the table after spending 20 determined minutes trying to carry one of Raymond's work boots through a doorway that was narrower than the boot. Eleanor sat with a mug of tea between both hands while Raymond cleaned the mud from Penny's leather leash. Neither of them had spoken about what had happened beneath the folding table at the market. They had discussed dinner, the weather, the loose gutter above the back porch, and whether Penny had eaten part of a paper towel or merely redistributed it throughout the living room. They had avoided the more difficult subject because married people could become astonishingly skilled at stepping around the same emotional hole in the floor. Eleanor finally broke the silence.
Why did you really want her?
Raymond did not look up. We already talked about that. No, we talked about exercise, security, having a dog in the house. Those are reasons. Those are brochure reasons. Raymond rubbed the leather with an old cloth. Eleanor waited. She had learned that pressing him too quickly usually produced either a joke or a wall. Tonight, he offered neither. After I retired, he said eventually, everybody kept telling me I'd earned a rest. Eleanor remained quiet. Raymond leaned back in the chair. You know what rest feels like when nobody needs anything from you. Peaceful? For about 6 weeks. Raymond had retired 5 years earlier, after 43 years of repairing farm machinery, diesel engines, hydraulic systems, and whatever else people dragged into Hollis equipment, with the hopeful statement that it had just started making a noise. He had been the man farmers called when a tractor stopped in the middle of planting season. He had once rebuilt a transmission overnight because a family could not afford to lose 3 days of harvest. He knew which neighbor's generator would fail during the first freeze, and which widow would pretend she could fix a mower herself to avoid paying for labor. His usefulness had been measurable. There had always been a broken thing waiting for him. Retirement removed the schedule first, then the phone calls, then the small emergencies that made him feel woven into other people's lives. There are days now, Raymond said, staring at his hands, when I could sit in that garage from breakfast until dark, and it wouldn't matter to anybody whether I fixed a thing. Eleanor opened her mouth, but he continued before she could reassure him. I know you need me. That's not what I mean. I know. When Penny came home, she needed breakfast at 7. She needed the yard checked. She needed somebody to get up when she cried at 5:30 in the morning because apparently respectable dogs believe dawn is optional. Eleanor smiled faintly. You complained every morning. I enjoyed complaining. That sounded like Raymond. Then his expression changed. I think I liked being necessary again. He looked embarrassed by the admission, perhaps because it was not heroic. He had not chosen Penny solely out of compassion or wisdom. Part of him had wanted a creature whose dependence would prove he still mattered. That's not a very good reason to keep a dog, he said. Eleanor looked at Penny sleeping under the table, one ear twitching in a dream. Maybe not, by itself. Raymond looked across at her. Your turn. Eleanor wished she had not started the conversation. That, she thought, was usually the problem with honesty. It created expectations of reciprocity. She watched rain slide down the kitchen glass. The house got too quiet. Raymond frowned. It's always been quiet. No, it became quiet. Eleanor began naming things she had never gathered into a single sentence. Their neighbor Carol had moved to North Carolina to live near her daughter. Nancy Weaver from Eleanor's old school office had died the previous winter. Margaret Ellis no longer drove at night. 2 couples from church had moved into assisted living. Their children called, visited, sent photographs, and loved them sincerely, but their lives had formed circles of their own. Eleanor did not resent that. She had raised children to build lives, not orbit hers. Still, there were afternoons when Raymond worked in the garage and Eleanor stood alone in the hallway and could hear the kitchen clock ticking from the bedroom. It sounds foolish, she said. It doesn't. Sometimes I think about the next 10 years, and it feels like a house closing one room at a time. Raymond's face softened. Eleanor hated pity and was grateful he did not offer any. Penny made noise, she continued. She knocks over the water bowl. She scratches the door. She steals laundry. She has apparently declared war on cardboard. I think I wanted something in the house that didn't know how to be quiet yet. Raymond looked beneath the table. So I wanted to be needed. And I wanted interruption. That poor dog had no idea what job she was applying for. Eleanor laughed, but the truth remained. They had both placed something on Penny she could never responsibly carry. Raymond had wanted her to restore usefulness. Eleanor had wanted her to defeat silence. Neither intention was cruel, but good intentions could still become unfair expectations. "She doesn't owe us that," Eleanor said. Raymond nodded slowly. "No. She doesn't have to make us younger." "That would be disappointing. I was counting on at least 10 years. "She doesn't have to prove our son wrong." "That part I'm less enthusiastic about." Eleanor gave him a look. Raymond surrendered. "Fine. He doesn't owe us that, either." For the first time, the possibility of keeping Penny felt less like a defense of their independence and more like an ordinary commitment, with feeding schedules, training setbacks, vet bills, muddy floors, adjusted expectations, and no promise that the dog would fix anything in them. Across town, Andrew Hayes sat in Dr. Samuel Mercer's office, with Boone lying on a thick rubber mat beside his chair. Rain drummed against the clinic roof. Samuel had Boone's full imaging results open on a monitor. "Mild osteoarthritis," he said. "Early enough that we can manage discomfort well. His heart looks good. Blood work is good. Nothing here says he cannot have years of quality life." Andrew exhaled. "So we build him back up." Samuel removed his glasses and folded them carefully. "That depends what you mean by build." Andrew already disliked where the conversation was going. Samuel explained that Boone could remain active, train at moderate intensity, walk, track casually, play, and continue doing many familiar things. But repeated exposure to loud machinery, slick surfaces, crowded interiors, and high-stimulation environments was no longer something Samuel recommended simply because Boone had tolerated it before. Andrew leaned back. "He can still do those things?" "Yes." "Then why stop?" Samuel studied him. "Because ability is not consent, and endurance is not the same thing as comfort." Andrew's jaw tightened. "He's a working dog." "He's also 7. There was nothing dramatic in Samuel's tone, which somehow made it harder to fight. Andrew wanted an injury to treat, a timetable to follow, a standard to meet. Instead, he had been given aging. Aging had no opponent, no mission, no victory condition. He looked at Boone's graying muzzle and realized with discomfort that Boone's reliability had become evidence in Andrew's private case against time. As long as Boone still worked exactly as before, Andrew could pretend nothing essential had changed in either of them. Samuel seemed to read part of that in his face. "You don't have to turn him into a house ornament," he said. "You just have to stop asking yesterday's dog to live in today's body." Andrew looked away. He hated the sentence because it sounded dangerously applicable beyond dogs. On the other side of Smithfield, Tessa Morgan stood in her father's kitchen holding a plastic pill organizer. Her father, Dennis Morgan, was 68, a thick-waisted man with a square face, gray hair cut close, heavy eyebrows, and a left arm that still hung slightly stiff after the stroke he had suffered in May. Before the stroke, Dennis had worked 35 years as a roofing contractor and prided himself on doing everything without help. The stroke had not changed his stubbornness. It had merely made independence more complicated. Tessa had begun helping him by instinct. She opened jars before he asked, cut food before he reached for the knife, answered questions from nurses while he sat beside her. That evening she caught herself reaching for the buttons of his flannel shirt. Then she stopped. Eleanor's voice came back to her. "Understanding why you do something does not erase what you do." "Dad," Tessa said, "do you want help with that?" Dennis looked suspiciously at her. "With my shirt?" "Yeah." He worked one button through the hole using his right hand. It took almost half a minute. "No." Tessa waited. The second button took longer. Dennis muttered a curse. Tessa still waited. Finally, he looked at her. "Now I do." She stepped forward. It was such a small change that nobody else would have noticed. But for Tessa, asking first felt like learning a new grammar. Day 30 arrived beneath clear skies. Eleanor placed 3 sheets of paper on the kitchen table. Raymond looked down at them. The first said, "Keep Penny." The second said, "Find another home." The third said, "More time." "You made ballots?" he asked. "I like organization." You worked in a school office too long. Penny was somewhere behind them. That should have worried both of them. Raymond sat down. He looked at the papers for so long that Eleanor could hear the kitchen clock again. Tick, tick, tick. Then Penny shot through the doorway with one of Raymond's black dress socks hanging from her mouth. "Hey!" Raymond stood. Penny accelerated. "Penny!" The puppy disappeared into the hallway. Raymond went after her. Eleanor heard feet, claws, Raymond complaining about organized crime, a chair scrape, then absolute silence. She began laughing before he returned. When Raymond finally came back, his hair was disordered, and the sock hung from his left hand, dark with saliva. "You think this is funny?" Eleanor was laughing too hard to answer. Raymond looked at the 3 papers, then at the ruined sock.
Then toward the hallway, where Penny's head appeared cautiously around the corner. He sat down. Without ceremony, Raymond tore the first sheet in half, then the second, then the third. Eleanor stopped laughing. "You're sure?" Raymond looked at Penny. "No." Eleanor waited. Raymond smiled. "But I know what I'm choosing." That was enough. Not because Penny had become easy, not because their fears had disappeared, not because keeping her proved anyone wrong. They simply understood, finally, that Penny was not there to make Raymond useful, keep Eleanor from loneliness, restore youth, defend pride, or repair the future. She was there because they had chosen a life that included her. And this time, they knew exactly what that meant. 2 months after the afternoon that had made Harbor Junction Market feel larger than it had any right to be, Smithfield woke under a pale December sky, clear and cold without snow. The trees along the Dawson Street had lost nearly all their leaves, and the early light fell through bare branches in long gray bars across the driveway. Eleanor stood in the kitchen, buttoning a dark blue coat, while Penny paced impatiently between the table and the back door. At 5 months old, the German Shepherd puppy had changed enough that photographs from October already looked like they belonged to another dog. Her legs had grown long and slightly awkward. Her black saddle had deepened across her back. Both ears now stood upright, and her paws still seemed to belong to an animal several sizes larger than the rest of her body. Penny was learning quickly, although not in a straight line. She could wait politely at the front door and then 5 minutes later try to steal a dish towel. He could ignore a passing lawnmower and become suspicious of a cardboard box left beside the curb. She was not becoming perfect. Eleanor had stopped expecting perfection to be the point. Raymond came in from the mudroom wearing his old brown work jacket. The modified leather leash was fastened around his waist, its original brown strap connected to the wider belt he had built after Grace Holloway's recommendation. His right hand still had bad mornings. This was one of them. He flexed his fingers once, then clipped the secondary handle to his left wrist. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Harbor Junction." Raymond stopped. Penny sat automatically when the leash stopped moving, although her tail continued sweeping the floor. "No." Eleanor pulled on one glove. "That sounded almost youthful." "I'm serious." "So am I." "We don't need anything from there." "We need milk." Raymond stared at her. "We have milk." "We also had milk last time." "You're making this symbolic on purpose." "Only a little." Raymond looked toward the window. "Why go back?" Eleanor had been expecting the question, because the truth was, she did not particularly want to. She could still remember the fluorescent light, Tessa's phone, the bags of chips falling, Raymond's face after the laughter. Memory had an irritating way of preserving humiliation with more detail than happiness. Still, she said, "Because it's 6 minutes from our house." "That is not a reason." "It is exactly the reason. I don't want to drive 20 minutes for milk for the next 10 years because 2 girls were cruel to us one afternoon." Raymond said nothing. Eleanor continued, "Avoiding it forever gives that day more importance than it deserves." "You've been rehearsing this." "Since Tuesday." "Thought so." Raymond looked down at Penny. Penny looked up at him.
"If this goes badly," he said, "I'm blaming both of you." Eleanor picked up her purse. Penny can't read complaints. Convenient. The drive took 6 minutes. Raymond was quiet for 5 of them. When Harbor Junction appeared ahead, Eleanor felt a familiar tightening beneath her ribs. She hated that. She had spent most of her adult life believing courage was something dramatic people required for dramatic circumstances. Age had taught her otherwise. Sometimes courage was simply returning to a perfectly ordinary room where you had once been made to feel small. Raymond parked near the side entrance. Penny jumped down, then paused. The automatic doors opened with a mechanical hiss. Penny's ears moved forward. Raymond did not urge her. "Take your time." The puppy sniffed the cold air drifting from inside. Then she stepped forward. Slowly. One paw, then another. Raymond walked beside her with the leash loose. Eleanor followed. Inside, the store looked offensively unchanged. Same coffee machines, same windshield wipers, same snack displays. The world rarely redesigned itself to accommodate your emotional history. Maria Bell stood near a shelf checking an inventory sheet. She noticed the Dawsons, gave a brief nod, and did not hurry over. Eleanor appreciated that immediately. Tessa was behind the register. Her expression changed the moment she saw them. For a second, Eleanor watched several impulses cross the young woman's face. Surprise, embarrassment, uncertainty, perhaps even the temptation to disappear into the stockroom. Tessa stayed. She wore the same green polo as before. Her auburn hair was tied back neatly, and there were faint shadows under her eyes that made her look older than she had 2 months earlier. "Mrs. Dawson?" she said. "Hello, Tessa." "Mr. Dawson?" Raymond nodded. Tessa looked down at Penny. Penny looked at the display of beef jerky. Some instincts apparently survived personal growth. Eleanor picked up a basket. They walked the aisles. Nothing happened. That should not have felt significant, but it did. Raymond selected milk. Eleanor added eggs. Penny sniffed a rack of potato chips, decided against committing a crime, and returned to Raymond's side. At the back of the store, a bottle rolled from a shelf. Penny startled but recovered before the leash tightened. Raymond noticed. He said nothing. So did Eleanor. When they returned to the register, Tessa began scanning their groceries. For several seconds, only the soft beep of the scanner filled the space between them. Then Tessa stopped. She placed both hands flat on the counter. "I owe you another apology." Raymond's face remained unreadable. Eleanor waited. Tessa took a breath. "I made you into a joke because I thought I had the right to." There was no mention of her father, no mention of stress, no mention of being scared, no claim that she had not meant it. "I was wrong." Eleanor studied her. This apology felt different because it did not ask Eleanor to make Tessa feel better. "Do you understand why?" Eleanor asked. Tessa nodded. "I think I do." Eleanor could have said, "It's all right." People said that constantly when something was not all right, often because everyone wanted discomfort to end. She did not. "You were wrong," Eleanor said. Tessa swallowed. "Yes." Eleanor placed the carton of eggs on the counter. "Don't put those under the milk." Tessa blinked, then almost smiled. "I won't." And that was all. No embrace, no tears, no sudden friendship. The groceries continued down the counter. Life had room for reconciliation without requiring intimacy. The automatic doors opened behind them. Andrew Hayes entered with Boone. Raymond noticed first. Boone had changed little outwardly since autumn, though the gray around his muzzle seemed more noticeable now that Raymond knew to look for it. The large German shepherd walked calmly beside Andrew until they reached the polished strip of flooring near the entrance. Then Boone stopped. Andrew stopped too. Raymond watched from 20 feet away. The old Andrew might have given the command again. Raymond knew that now. Andrew looked at Boone. Boone glanced toward the glass doors. Andrew rested one hand loosely on the leash. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Andrew turned around. "This way, buddy." He walked Boone back outside. Raymond followed them with his eyes through the front windows. Andrew led Boone to the SUV, opened the rear door, settled him inside, and lowered 2 windows several inches before returning toward the store alone. When Andrew came through the doors again, he looked toward the counter. His eyes met Raymond's. No smile, no speech, just a small nod. Raymond returned it. Eleanor saw the exchange. She understood more of it than either man would probably have admitted. Both had once mistaken control for responsibility. Both were discovering that sometimes responsible people changed the plan. Tessa scanned the milk. Beep. Penny's ears flicked. Then someone in the stockroom dropped a plastic crate filled with canned soda. The crash was louder than anyone expected. Metal cans bounced against one another in a violent clatter. Penny launched sideways. The leather leash snapped tight across Raymond's waist. His body shifted half a step. Eleanor froze. Tessa froze. Andrew turned. For a fraction of a second, the entire original afternoon seemed to return. The store, the noise, the frightened puppy, Raymond holding the line. But Raymond did not pull back. His right hand remained open. His left hand stayed near the secondary grip without closing around it. Penny stood rigid, breathing fast. Raymond looked down at her. He said nothing. 1 second, 2. Penny looked at him. 3. Then slowly, almost awkwardly, Penny folded into a sit. Her ears remained alert. Her breathing began to soften. Raymond's mouth lifted, not a triumphant smile, not the smile of a man who had proven that everyone else had been wrong, just recognition. He loosened the line. "Good girl," he said quietly. Tessa released the breath she had been holding. Eleanor felt her own shoulders drop. Andrew turned back toward the coffee machines without interfering. Raymond looked around the store. People had noticed. A few had glanced over. Nobody laughed. More importantly, Raymond realized he no longer cared whether they had. He had spent months thinking strength meant holding tighter when something pulled away from him. Now Penny had taught him something machinery never had. Not everything was made safer by force. Sometimes the strongest thing a person could do was remain steady long enough for fear to finish speaking. Tessa handed Eleanor the receipt. "Have a good day." "You too." Raymond opened the door for Eleanor while Penny walked beside him. Outside, the December sunlight was bright enough to make him squint. Eleanor waited until they reached the Buick. "Well?" Raymond opened the rear door for Penny. "Well, what?" "Was the milk worth it?" Raymond looked back at Harbor Junction, then at the puppy climbing into the car. "No." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Raymond shut the door. "But coming back was." For once, Eleanor did not improve the sentence. It did not need improving. 6 months later, late spring had softened Smithfield, Virginia, into long green afternoons, warm wind, and the smell of cut grass drifting across open windows. The dogwood blossoms were beginning to fall. The pagan river moved quietly beyond the old neighborhoods, and Penny had become almost unrecognizable from the puppy who once crouched beneath a folding table in terror. She was no longer tiny. At 9 months old, the German Shepherd stood long-legged and athletic, with a dark black saddle across her back, rich tan markings along her chest and legs, and both ears finally upright with the seriousness of a dog who had no idea how ridiculous she looked when carrying one of Raymond's socks through the house. Penny had developed an impressive ability to identify freshly washed laundry within 30 seconds of it leaving the dryer. Dirty socks interested her very little. Clean ones apparently possessed spiritual significance. Raymond had stopped asking why. That morning, Penny stole his last clean black sock and ran into the hallway. "Criminal," Raymond called after her. Penny accelerated. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and laughed. Raymond was 76, going on 77 now. His white hair seemed thinner, his shoulders remained slightly bent, and the first 3 fingers of his right hand still had mornings when they felt distant from the rest of him. Physical therapy had not restored them completely. It had improved grip strength, reduced stiffness, and given Raymond exercises he complained about with religious consistency. "You're supposed to do the hand stretches before breakfast," Eleanor reminded him. "I'm supposed to be retired." "Apparently your fingers didn't get the paperwork." Raymond gave her a wounded look and flexed his hand anyway. The important change was not that his hand had improved. The important change was that he no longer hid when it did not. Some afternoons he asked Eleanor to open a stubborn jar. Other days he switched tools to his left hand. If his fingers went numb during a walk, he shortened the route. 6 months earlier, each adjustment would have felt like evidence against him. Now it was mostly logistics. The brown leather leash remained part of every walk. Very little about it was original anymore. Raymond had replaced one buckle, added a padded waist section, shortened the main lead, punched new adjustment holes, changed 2 rivets, and attached a secondary left-hand grip. The leather had become softer from rain, sun, use, and Penny's occasional attempt to chew it when bored. Raymond once would have considered every modification proof that the first design had failed. Now he considered them maintenance. That difference, Eleanor thought, had taken him most of his life to learn. She had changed too, though she noticed her own progress less easily. One afternoon at the pharmacy, a clerk had asked if she wanted help carrying a large bag to the car. 6 months earlier, Eleanor might have heard condescension before the sentence was finished. Instead, she had asked herself a simpler question. Did she want help? The bag was heavy. "Yes, thank you," she had said. The sky had not fallen. Her independence had survived. The next week, when a different clerk began answering a question to Raymond even though Eleanor had asked it, she interrupted calmly. "I'm the one asking." That felt different too. Eleanor had finally found the distinction she had been searching for since Harbor Junction. Help was not humiliation. The absence of choice was. Penny, meanwhile, continued refusing to cooperate with anyone's philosophical development. She still startled at certain sharp metallic noises. She still preferred open spaces to crowded interiors. She had learned to recover faster, but recovery was not the same as becoming fearless. A delivery truck dropping its ramp could still make her jump. A spoon falling in the kitchen usually earned only a glance. Squirrels remained beyond reason. The Dawsons had stopped measuring Penny against an imaginary perfect dog. They measured days instead. Did she recover? Was she curious? Did she eat? Did she sleep? Could they manage her safely? Were they all still enjoying this life more often than they were enduring it? Most days the answer was yes. Across town, Andrew Hayes had begun adjusting his own definitions. Boone no longer entered high-stimulation training environments. The 7-year-old German Shepherd still exercised every day, still practiced scent work in open fields, still obeyed commands with the quiet precision that had once made Andrew proud enough to confuse performance with well-being. But Boone no longer needed to prove anything either. Andrew remained active-duty Navy, though more of his schedule now involved instruction, assessment, and mentoring younger handlers, rather than repeatedly pushing himself and Boone through demanding environments. The transition irritated him at first. Advising meant watching someone else execute instead of doing it himself. Teaching required patience where action had once been enough. It also revealed one of Andrew's oldest flaws. He was good at giving commands. He was less skilled at waiting long enough to understand what another person, or animal, was already telling him. Boone had become an inconvenient teacher. On some mornings, Andrew called him from the porch and Boone simply remained lying in a patch of sunlight. Months earlier, Andrew might have repeated the command. Now he sometimes looked at the old dog and said, "Fine." Boone would close his eyes again. Andrew suspected the dog had been waiting 7 years for that particular promotion. At Harbor Junction Market, change appeared in quieter forms. Tessa still worked behind the counter. She and Eleanor had not become close friends, which Eleanor considered a relief. Life already required too many implausible obligations without turning every difficult person into family. Some days Tessa asked about Penny. Some days Eleanor asked about Dennis. Other days they exchanged only a greeting. That was enough. One afternoon, Eleanor watched from an aisle while an elderly woman stood at the register counting coins from a small change purse. The woman looked close to 80, short and round, with white curls beneath a lavender rain bonnet and fingers that trembled slightly as she separated quarters from nickels. A line formed behind her. Someone sighed. The woman apologized. "Take your time," Tessa said. She did not reach across and count the money. She did not ask the next customer to step forward. She waited. The older woman found the final nickel herself. Tessa accepted it as though the transaction had taken exactly as long as it was supposed to. Eleanor said nothing about the moment. Praise would have made it performative. Some changes deserve the dignity of going unnoticed. Later that afternoon, Eleanor and Raymond walked Penny along the road near the Pagan River. Spring sunlight shimmered between the trees, and the water beyond the grass reflected a pale blue sky. Penny moved ahead with the loose, confident gait of an adolescent shepherd who believed every smell required investigation. Raymond stopped near a split-rail fence. "Hold on." He adjusted the leather strap around his waist. Eleanor looked at the patches, rivets, extra holes, and replacement buckle. "You used to hate that thing." Raymond glanced down. "I hated what it proved." "What did it prove?" "That I'd changed." Eleanor waited. A squirrel appeared on the fence. Penny became absolutely still. Her ears pointed forward. Her entire body narrowed into purpose. Raymond followed her gaze. "Oh no." Eleanor smiled. "So what does the leash prove now?" Raymond watched Penny watching the squirrel with the concentration of a creature who believed the fate of the United States depended on immediate action. He smiled. "Now I think changing is just another way of continuing." Penny launched. The leash snapped tight around Raymond's hips. He took one solid step forward and stayed upright. The squirrel vanished into an oak tree. "Penny!" Eleanor burst out laughing. Raymond steadied himself and looked at the dog. 6 months, he muttered. Not 1 ounce of respect for the elderly. Penny looked back at him, tongue hanging out, apparently pleased with herself. Eleanor laughed harder. Nothing about the moment was miraculous. Raymond's hand still had bad days. Eleanor still sometimes heard the house become too quiet and felt a familiar fear move through her. Andrew still had to resist solving everything by force of will. Boone was still growing older, in a body no command could reverse. Tessa could not erase what she had once done. Penny was still Penny. No one had been restored to who they used to be. Perhaps that was the wrong goal. The leather leash had once been something Raymond held as proof that he was strong enough. Now it proved nothing. One end remained attached to Raymond. The other remained attached to Penny. There was enough slack for the dog to move, enough strength to keep both of them safe. And as Eleanor watched her husband continue along the river road beside a German shepherd who occasionally tested both his balance and his vocabulary, she thought age might be something like that. Not preserving the exact grip you once had on life, not pretending your hands never changed, just learning how to hold differently, without letting go. Maybe the miracle in this story was never that Raymond became strong again, or that Penny learned to behave perfectly. Maybe the miracle was quieter. 2 people learning that change does not mean defeat. We often measure strength by what we can still carry, control, fix, or do without help. But life eventually teaches all of us that dignity is not found in pretending we never weaken. It is found in knowing when to adjust, when to wait, and when to let someone walk beside us without giving away the right to choose our own path. Perhaps God does not always answer our prayers by restoring what time has taken. Sometimes He places a new road before us and gives us enough grace to walk it differently. Raymond's old leather leash changed shape many times, yet it kept doing what mattered most, keeping 2 lives connected without holding either one too tightly. If this story reminded you of someone who is learning to live differently with age, please share it with them. Tell us in the comments what this story meant to you, and subscribe for more stories like this. May God bless you, protect your family, and give you courage for every season still ahead.